I'd like to talk about one of the thorniest problems that we face today, and that is the problem of migration. It's a problem that's really been around for a long time, and it's a problem that we've struggled with as a country. It's a problem that many countries struggle with, and a problem really that's only getting worse, certainly with the impacts of climate change, and we see what's happening in terms of storms, war, possibilities for war. And so it becomes a real issue for us in terms of how we can handle this in a comprehensive manner, in a good manner. And it really is an issue that's very divisive because there are all sorts of solutions to it that people talk about. So it's good to reflect on it together and see what are some possibilities going forward, just to really have a discussion, a dialogue about it. And what prompted my reflection on this was a report from the Hope Border Institute, No Queda de Otra, the idea that this group on the border that actually works with immigrants, so they see it firsthand, so they have some sense of it. We're a bit detached sometimes. We are far away from it. We just get news reports. But what's actually going on? What's the reality that people are encountering there at the border? And the question that they wanted to ask the people is really what led you to leave your home? Most of us, let's face it, do not want to leave home. We want to leave home maybe for a trip, visit friends, but our home is our place that we feel comfortable, we feel relaxed in, we're familiar with the surroundings. None of us wants to uproot and leave home. Sometimes we do it to find a new job. Sometimes we do it for a change of scenery, to go to a better location, something like that. But leaving home is not something that's high on the list for a lot of people, obviously. And really, that this report dealt with a particular group, and they were from Central America. And they came up with really three reasons why they would leave home. The first was poverty. The second was gang violence. And the third was domestic violence, domestic abuse. So these are the three big reasons why this particular group that the Hope Border Institute dealt with, uh, why they would leave home. And you can understand, if there's poverty, you want to maybe find a better job, help to support your family. If you're in a situation where you can't support your family, very difficult. What are you going to do? And secondly, gang violence, difficulty when you face people who are intimidating, who are threatening you, who are possibly going to kill you. A very difficult situation, obviously. And then domestic violence, another hard situation to deal with. So you can see why these three causes would be major causes for people to want to leave home. When they were dealing with the Mexicans, a different group, the Hope Water Institute found violence and threats to be the number one reason, forced conscription of young men into gangs run by drug cartels. So what was happening was, you either go into the cartel and work for us, or we're going to harm you or your family. So again, these very difficult situations that people face, and we can, kind of have sympathy for those situations. Um, their income in their country of origin was insufficient to cover basic needs. So when you're trying to have housing, when you're trying to get food, healthcare, and the jobs that are available are not sufficient to cover those expenses, what are you going to do? What's your alternative? So a very hard situation. Cousins or friends who have gone to another country and they're doing well there. And of course, most of us would say, well, the solution is simple. You just go to the embassy, file, a form to get into the other country. Uh, and get on a list and do that. And, most people would say, yeah, that's a reasonable alternative. Why not do that? But then when you're faced with a situation where you do that and your delay is said, well, you're on this list and we'll get to you in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, yeah, maybe 30 years, and you were starving, you know, that doesn't look too good a perspective. You're saying, well, I got to do something in the immediate. I can't get on this list. And of course, it's a difficult situation because there are people who are on the list and are waiting, and these other people don't wait, and you're like, well, this isn't fair to them. And so a very thorny situation. But sometimes people do things out of desperation where they see no other alternative. And I think that's the situation many times. It's an unfortunate situation. We can say, well, it's just too bad for you, but then, you're saying, oh, I want to live, So that's not too helpful to say that, right? Um, Two hurricanes, of course, were also contributing factors. We had the Hurricane Eta and the Hurricane Iota, November of 2020, one after the other hit this region, this Central American region. And so, your home and your job and everything can be quickly taken away from you. This hurricane, you don't have insurance, government aid is very skimpy or non-existent. What are you going to do? You're faced with this really desperate situation. And so you go to the alternative of migration. Well, maybe if I go to this other country, it might be better for me. It might not be. You don't know. You're taking a risk, but you're saying what I'm facing here is just total devastation. My home has been leveled. My place of employment has been destroyed. I have no prospects for anything. I'm desperate here. What am I going to do? Um, 60% of migrants travel with their families. So a lot of times we think of the migrant as that one individual, but in a situation where their home has been wiped out, a lot of times they're traveling with their families. So 60%, that's kind of a large number to be traveling with their families. And again, that creates a problem for them in terms of traveling with their families, but also for the country that they're going to. Another factor, of course, is COVID-19. They're traveling with their families, but they're trying to wear masks, or can they get access to medical care? Can they get the vaccines? This, of course, further complicates an already complicated situation. So you can see how many layers of difficulty really you have when dealing with migration. Um, 4.7 million people in Latin America and the Caribbean were pushed out of the middle class into poverty by COVID-19. So there they were, they're in the middle class, they're doing well, and all of a sudden COVID strikes, they lose their job, there's no unemployment benefits maybe for them, there's no help for coming from the government, which is the government's already stressed. So now I've been doing well, and now I'm in poverty. What am I going to do? Again, desperation sets in. You think that this might be an alternative. You don't want to do this. You don't want to leave your home, but what can I do? Am I going to stay here and starve to death? You're facing a desperate situation, and so when people face a desperate situation, they take these journeys, which again involve so many difficulties. For example, in Honduras, 25% of the population is vaccinated, and Guatemala, 16%. So you can see very low vaccination rates in those countries. So the difficulty, again, of getting adequate health care is hard. Nearly 70% were extorted or threatened by a gang or criminal organization. So dealing with those who were coming, what did they find? Well, these gangs, these criminal organizations were threatening them, and threatening not only them, but their families. So it becomes a difficulty. It's one thing for you to be threatened, but they're threatening your wife, your children, your mother, your father, your aunts, your uncles, a very difficult situation. So 70%, again, such a large number of these migrants who are coming. Um, Impact also of climate change, increased drought, heavy rain, more frequent hurricanes with greater intensity. So you can see how this would be a real difficulty because climate change is impacting them in the everyday. How can you raise crops if there is a drought? How can you provide for your family if there's flooding? Difficult situations. Those most affected are those who work the land in rural areas and who do not pollute the atmosphere with greenhouse gas. I mean, it seems like such a crazy situation because here are these people that are not polluting. They're not adding to any large carbon footprint. They're rural people. They're living in these areas. They're doing farming, not using a lot of oil and gas and all of these fossil fuels which pollute, but yet they're suffering as a result of the greenhouse gases that we emit in the more developed countries. So here, we're impacting them, of course, not realizing it. We're just following what we normally think we should be doing, but yet that's having an impact on these other countries with increased storms, drought, flooding, all of these situations that are happening. To kind of help us relate to it, let's take a look at some of the examples that we find in terms of people that are showing up at the border. Uh, and these names have been somewhat changed to protect, the identity of the people. But these are actual people that they've encountered in their ministry at the border. The first one is Luz, who had a great job in Honduras at a bank. She was raising two sons. After the pandemic, her salary was cut by 65% at the bank. She took out a loan then to cover her expenses. The group she got the loan from started to extort more money from her after she paid off the loan. So she took out the loan, she paid it off, but then they said, we want more. And they started to extort her. She faced death threats when she reported the crime to two different police stations. And you would say normally, okay, they're threatening you, go to the police. When she reported the crimes, they told her to keep on paying. So they said, the alternative is simple. If you don't keep on paying, they're going to kill you. We can't protect you. Thank you, police. Keep on paying. So again, the difficulty that she faced. She had to leave, but she only had enough wherewithal to take the one son with her, not the two sons. She tried to protect her children. She's obviously a person who can contribute to America, and she's definitely a refugee. She should have been interviewed in Texas rather than in Mexico. But again, there are these COVID restrictions, and because of the COVID restrictions, they can't enter a certain country. There's someone, obviously, and of course, you make this distinction between legal and illegal. If she enters the country, she's illegal, but really, she's following the legal channel as a refugee. She's being threatened in her country. She is really eligible as a refugee, but again, facing these difficult situations. Another example is Sarah, 43-year-old from Guatemala. She made $2 a day doing laundry and cutting wood. The hurricane destroyed her home. She is called illegal, but really, she's really suffering from climate change. So there we have a perfect situation. Her home has been destroyed. What's going to happen? We call her illegal to a certain extent. Obviously, she is, but then it's a climate change impact. So how is that? How does that factor into the illegality of it? Who are the ones who are legal, not legal, climate change, greenhouse gas? I mean, all of these situations coming together, very difficult. Felipe, The third person, when he was with the Franciscans in Central America for 4 years, but he had to leave the order to support his family, a very devoutly religious person, and wanted to spread the faith. But he had to support his family because his dad was ill. Life became impossible for him in Nicaragua, and he had to come to America again because of pressures from gangs and violent situations. He was trying to do his best, but he could not really survive in Nicaragua, and so came to America. Now, what are some of the solutions to this thorny problem of migration that have been bandied about? First solution is to reduce gang violence. And again, that's a long-term solution. Working with the gangs, very difficult to do that. Some of these governments don't have the resources to adequately do that. So again, a difficult situation. Strengthening the criminal justice system in those areas so that when you go to the police station, they can help you and not tell you to keep on paying the extortion. Uh, Providing economic development support, which certainly our country and many other countries are trying to do, help them with the economics in the country. Uh, Making climate change mitigation and adaptation an important part of the development strategy. So working on the climate change issue, mitigating the effects of it, certainly that would help many of those people so they don't have to migrate from their homes. Getting COVID vaccines to the people to help them fight against the illness. And then to revoke the Title 42 expulsion policy, another policy that is much under debate in terms of the people then not getting a fair hearing in terms of their refugee status. They're under Title 42, they have to wait in Mexico, and sometimes, unfortunately, threatened there in Mexico, not in a good situation there as well. And the overall context of this, when you look at it, is the border crisis and the moral crisis. There certainly is a border crisis, no question about it. All of these migrants coming, how are we going to deal with them? Many say, well, we'll just transport them back, imprison them, all sorts of, some people even say, well, just shoot them. I mean, in callous disregard for human life. There's all sorts of things that are bandied about it. Many people say, well, I don't want them in my country because, it's going to take away from my resources. They might take my job, they might take my money, spending more on social services, we'll have to raise my taxes. All of these are, of course, legitimate points that we have to entertain, discuss, and talk about. But is the overall crisis a border crisis, or is it in part a moral crisis? How does our morality impact this? Are we not supposed to think of our brothers and sisters in a compassionate and caring way? Uh, Difficult, very stressful to think about it in those terms. It makes more of a demand on us. A lot of times we would like a simple solution, but really the whole moral impact of this is when people are in need, how do we reach out to them? Does our sense of that stop with our family, with our state, with our country? Does it stop at our borders? All of these very difficult questions to think about and ponder. But certainly, we have to say, what does the Lord call us to? What would Jesus want in this type of situation? What is our God asking us to do in terms of compassion and caring for others? So, again, a very difficult situation, many pros and cons, certainly on all sides, but I think it becomes certainly one of the moral crises for our time that we have to deal with and try to resolve in the best way we possibly can.